Welcome to episode 3 of MyLife, Chassidus Applied. Your questions keep coming in, which is very encouraging, and the questions actually become more and more sensitive and more profound and more complicated, which I believe is a good sign because there's a dialogue going on, a conversation of applying Chassidus to our lives today, personal lives. I don't see a greater mission than fulfilling what the Alter Rebbe, the Tanya, wrote when he composed Tanya that he wants us to be, and he's offering answers to all questions. So no one can truly say that they can find answers to all questions, yet the exploration and the search for it is quite a journey in itself. And as we say, Shalas Chacham Chetzi Tshuva, the question of a wise person is half an answer. The mere fact that we're conscious and we're aware and we're discussing matters that are personal to us and looking for ways to apply Torah and Chassidus to it in itself is partial answer. So I want to just give one or two comments and introductions. One of the questions that were asked, pretty much a common denominator, was a request to suggest concrete steps in discussing these matters, to not remain too vague, but as concrete as possible, so each of us can go away with something that we can actually attempt in our own lives, which of course has the challenge, every one of us is a little different, but nevertheless, I will definitely make an attempt to do that. To sum up, after a question is answered, some concrete steps that each of us can apply. Additionally, it's interesting that certain themes continue to prop up. The question of bittul and Kabbalah soil, and how to balance that with individuality and a sense of self, what Chassidus calls the yesh and the ayin, how to balance yesh and ayin, or how to balance self and individuality, identity, and a sense of higher purpose, is a question that continues to keep popping up in different terms and different contexts. So though I want to move on to many other questions, but I definitely will address that as well as the question of addiction and other desires, lusts, passions that we all are susceptible to, each in our own way. But I'd like to begin where we left off. I promised, Bli Neder, that I would read a very fascinating letter from the Rebbe about a question that was addressed, and very much relevant, I think, across the board, and touches upon something that may even be one of the contributions in Chassidus itself, the Rebbe's contribution, that accentuates and amplifies and applies Tanya and the principles of Chassidus to our particular challenges in our time. So let me pose it in the context of a question that came in. This will be an answer. I'll use the letter of the Rebbe to answer the following question. And the question is, how to deal with an aggressive child. So let me read. I love my child, but he leaves me exhausted and very discouraged. He's bright and can be charming when he wants to, but I worry about him a little more with each passing day. He seems to be acquiring a more aggressive nature as he grows older, terrorizes other children, is combative and smart-mouthed, and his teachers are constantly disciplining him. Baruch Hashem, we have a warm, loving and Chassidish home, are raising a generally well-adjusted family of children, all of whom, except for the one I'm describing, are far less contentious, demanding, and easier to deal with. I'm embarrassed to say this, but is there something we're doing to elicit such behavior from one child and not the others? Does Chassidus offer any insight into the child-rearing minefield, addressing, of course, an aggressive child? Now, of course, this can be applied to many different situations. This is how the questioner posed it, but I ask you to apply it in any way that may be relevant, maybe not necessarily an aggressive child, maybe a unique child, but I will address it in this context. So here's a letter when the Rebbe established Tzivus Hashem, the army of Hashem. This was in 1980. When he established Chassidus Hashem, there were a number of rabbis and lay people that questioned the Rebbe's intent. Some wrote to the Rebbe questions and saying, in Judaism we always honored not Bar Kochva, the warriors, we honored Rabbi Akiva, the scholars. Warriors and war were never idolized in Judaism. Judaism honored scholarship, knowledge, good deeds, righteous people, godly people. And here, they were questioning the Rebbe. The Rebbe is giving a symbol for children, ingraining in children the concept of an army, Tzivus Hashem, army of Hashem. And there was even rankings, essentially modeling this group, this movement, which has reached hundreds of thousands of children, in the context of war and battle and so on. Of course, a battle of the Yetzer Hara, not, God forbid, a blood battle. But nevertheless, it seemed like it reeked from some type of aggressive elements. These were questions asked to the Rebbe. I remember a rabbi actually asked me this question. I told him to write to the Rebbe, and he did. And the Rebbe sent out a letter, that we have today. I'm just going to read one small part of it that answers this question, but in the answer, gives us an answer to the question about aggression in general, and touches upon a fundamental principle in Chassidus. And if you need something profoundly psychological, especially in child psychology and dealing with children, here you have it. I'll add something else as a footnote. Being that I was privy and I worked in the Rebbe's Fabrengens and Sichos writing the talks, so one of the early talks that the Rebbe delivered to Tzivus Hashem, and he would give talks several times a year specifically to the children, the Rebbe asked us to put together sources from Tanakh and Chazal, from all sources where we find the identification of God as a commander-in-chief. Because that was the term the Rebbe would often use, God as the commander-in-chief, gives us a mission of the day. Terms, very much war type of terms. And we put together a 2-page, basically concordancia, sources of everywhere this is used, and the Rebbe turned that into a footnote that's printed in one of the Sichos in Tavshin Mem Aleph. That would be 1981. I believe it's a Chanukah Sikha, the second Chanukah Sikha in Tavshin Mem Aleph. There were 2 talks then that the Rebbe gave to children. I think it was the last day of Chanukah, and there's a footnote that the Rebbe actually composed based on the research we gave the Rebbe, and the Rebbe turned it into a footnote that really established the precedent in Torah itself for this symbolism. But here's the letter, and as I said, it's a longer letter. I'm just going to read the end of it. And the Rebbe discusses why he chose this symbolism of army of Hashem, Tzivus Hashem. And he says the following: as with every health problem, physical, mental, or spiritual, the cure lies not in treating the symptoms, but in attacking the cause. Although the former may sometimes be necessary for relief in acute cases. Something we touched upon. So here you have another source, the difference between dealing symptomatic, remedial medicine, and root medicine, meaning getting to the root of it as opposed to the symptoms. So although short term, we often need that, a painkiller, a band-aid, etc., but the real solution is getting at the root of the problem. The Rebbe specifically says physical, mental, or spiritual. The Rebbe writes, one of the problems in our generation is the lack of Kabbalah soil. People feel they can do whatever they like. It's called V'lashon Chazal, that an Eved, a servant, likes to do whatever. Now, of course, we all know we have our animal soul. We all have our whims. We all have our temptations. Left unchecked, who knows where a person would end up. So the concept of Kabbalah soil, in a healthy way, and I qualify that because that's been a big topic, of course, is that we have to all have some form of accountability. This is true even not in religious circles. There's a Constitution of the United States that has laws, and you're accountable. You may not agree with these laws, or you may not find them comfortable. There's red lights and green lights, even on a very basic human level. Now, no one applies any divine meaning to that, but even on a human level, not everybody could be driving in the same direction, different directions at the same time. Specifically, the Torah being a divine blueprint, clearly there are guidelines. Everyone can understand that a human race to coexist requires a measure of accepting a certain common law. In the laws, that's called Kabbalah soil. So the Rebbe said, I thought long and hard about finding a way of inducing an American child to get used to the idea of subordination to a higher authority. Despite all the influences to the contrary, in the school, in the street, and even at home, where parents, not wishing to be bothered by their children, have all too often abdicated their authority and left it to others to deal with truancy, juvenile delinquency, etc. This is all language of the Rebbe's letter. I came to the conclusion, the Rebbe writes, that there was no other way than trying to effect a basic change in the nature through a system of discipline and obedience to rules which he can be induced to get accustomed to. Moreover, for this method to be effective, it would be necessary that it should be freely and readily accepted without coercion. Right there is a critical point, because as soon as you hear authority, frankly we all have a certain knee-jerk reaction. Who's this authority? Can we trust them? Who says we should listen to them? So clearly we're talking here in the context of a healthy authority. In the case of children and parents, obviously parents, for good or for bad, are not perfect, have to define certain moral standards. Your child run out to the street? Obviously not. So there is a need for some type of guidelines in Kabbalah Soil, again, in a healthy way. And we'll discuss much more of that in this and future episodes, how to infuse healthy Kabbalah Soil in people. So the Rebbe, he said clearly, I thought long and hard how to do this, and a way without coercion. Because we're not talking about actually subjecting children to authority. The Rebbe wanted to do it in a way that inspires them to respect a higher order, an ethical order, a higher cause, a higher calling, which, as we shall discuss, is the key to all happiness. The idea itself, the Rebbe says, is of course not a novel one. I'm continuing to read. It has already been emphasized by the Ramban in the introduction to his commentary on Mishnayos, where he points out that although ideally good things should be done for their own sake, I said Ramban, I'm Rambam. I should correct myself, Rambam, the Akdam at the Pirush Mishnayos, famous one, who says that even though it's ideally good things should be done for their own sake, what's called Lishma, it is necessary to use inducements with young children until they are old enough to know better. Which is why the basis of rewarding children with a prize, with a trip, with a candy, with a toy, whatever it may be. So the Rebbe continues, thus, a pilot Tzivus Hashem was instituted. It immediately proved a great success in getting the children to do good things, in keeping with the motto of Ahavta l'recha kamoicha, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, coupled with love and obedience to the commander-in-chief of Tzivus Hashem, namely Hashem Elokei Tzvakos, the God of hosts. Which is one of the sources, the God of hosts, commander-in-chief. This is the first statement. But here's the main punchline. And I want to thank, pointing out this letter, my colleague and friend, the Mashpia Rabbi Yaakov Winner in Melbourne, Australia, to pointing out this letter in context of this new series that we've launched here, My Life. The Rebbe continues, the Tzivus Hashem campaign has a further reward. Though not widely applicable to Jewish children attending Hebrew schools, this too has already been alluded to by our sages in their customary succinct way, by saying that a person born with a violent nature should become a, parentheses, bloodletting physician, or a sheikhet, a ritual slaughterer, or a moel, a circumciser. And this is the Rebbe's words. In order to give a positive outlet to his strong natural propensity. See Shabbos, Talmud Bavli, Shabbos, 156a, Kuf Nun Vav Aleph, Shabbos. Thus, children that might be inclined to aggressiveness, and hence easy candidates for street gangs and the like, would have a positive outlet by diverting their energy in the right direction. This can be analyzed at length. I just will be brief because we don't want to focus just on one point, but this has lessons and layers upon layers and far-reaching implications. First of all, on a very basic level, the Rebbe is not just relying on Kabbalah style. He also clearly says that we need to give an outlet for the nature of children. In this case, maybe an aggressive nature, where it could, God forbid, go the wrong direction. If you direct it in the right way, not suppress it, direct it in the right direction, that will help using it for the proper things. So you have here an answer to the question about aggressive children. Every child is unique. Specifically, we educate a child according to his or her way. So parents, no, every child is different. A child has a particularly aggressive nature. It can go both directions. To just punish a child, suppress the child, and say, just sit quietly, be like everyone else, if you can do it to some extent, great. But if it's going against the grain of the nature of the child, then it may not be, ultimately it'll explode. Suppression doesn't ultimately work. Therefore we have, say, Kabbalah sale, just follow orders. This child has energy, has a lot of energy. Energy needs to be channeled. Which takes us back to the topic of the Koyach HaMesava that we discussed, that each of us have, even in something that may be negative, the energy invested, the root of the energy, the source of that power in your soul, can be a very powerful and holy source, like he says in Likutei Torah. So the question was asked to follow up in this discussion. So where in Tanya it appears that you don't have room for the regular person to be able to transform and to even channel those energies. In Tanya the focus is primarily suppression, seemingly, for the regular person. A tzaddik has the power of ishapcha, which is transformation. in chapter 28, he makes it very clear. Do not be a fool to think that you can elevate the source of that evil force. Only tzaddikim can do that. The answer is very clear. That first of all, there are many levels of this. Even in Tanya, as we shall discuss, Tanya does not simply talk about suppression. It also talks about awakening the love inside of a person. It also talks about conditioning. It's not just pure a life of just constantly telling your mind, shut down, don't think bad thoughts. Obviously, you have to fill the mind with something. The reason Tanya may not go into this in detail is because the Tanya is speaking in general terms. Additionally, one could even argue that perhaps in later generations, the Rebbe saw, once there's a certain refinement in the world, possibly we may be able to have a taste of channeling certain forces within us. But without going into a whole pilpul, a whole discussion in Chassidus about how much iskafya, how much ishapcha we have, clearly from this letter it's very clear that we can't channel. Which brings me to another fascinating thing that I'd like to share. In the later years, the Rebbe's yechidus, public-private audiences, were not one-on-one with most people. It was with called yechidus klalis, group yechidus. I refer you to yechidus 24th of Nisan, Tavshin Memches. The 28th of Nisan, Tavshin Memches. 24th of Nisan, Chav Daled Nisan, right after Pesach. The Rebbe had a yechidus klalis, which was common after the Yom Tovim. And while the Rebbe was speaking, so there were couples, there were people there were Chassanim and Kalas would come in later. So these were people, guests, or whoever who needed yechidus for birthdays or other reasons. People also there with their families. In the middle of the Rebbe's blessing, he's talking about making a shliach mitzvah of every person in the room, including the children. He says to make a shliach mitzvah, that they should be an emissary of his to give charity, and he would give $1 to each one of them. The Rebbe suddenly hears, and you could hear in the recording, in the video, the background, the cry of a child. Okay, you hear the cry of a child. 30 seconds later, maybe 15 seconds later, the Rebbe speaks about it. He says to be a shliach mitzvah, even a child should be a shliach mitzvah. U'metech simcha v'tuv levav, the Rebbe says, and joyfully. And when you hear the shriek of a child, the Rebbe says, Mehet yakim kvichet. This is Esh Given, like it just happened. The Rebbe is referring to the cry that happened in that room there in 770 when the Rebbe was speaking. So even though he may be crying ostensibly because someone kvetched him, someone pushed him, or because he wants a toy, or he wants a candy, Atzukike, the Rebbe said, the truth is, the cry is coming from his divine soul, the nefesh alikis, from the neshama, which is crying out to achieve what it has to achieve in this world. Check it out. On the 24th of Nisan, Tavshin Memches. Clear evidence that cry, what's a cry? A cry, you can say a child needs a candy, needs a toy, like the Rebbe said, he's in pain, or whatever it is. No, within it lies the cry of the soul. Clearly, we can apply this across the board. That a cry that comes out of each of us, it could be a cry that maybe be crying for something that is completely inappropriate. Or something that's called, not God forbid, a taiva shel isur, something forbidden desire, even a taiva shel heter. You may be crying because you're hungry. Or if a veltzach, you decided you want something. It's really the cry of your soul. In essence, this is the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. Re'evim ganz mein, nafshe behem tisatif. The Baal Shem Tov says that when a person is drawn to something, even to an actual physical thing of beauty, a color, a particular food, it's the soul being drawn to the spark. We need a discussion why Tanya does he not address this for the regular person. But regardless, the Rebbe definitely brings it to regular people. He's talking about a child there in the Yechidus. He's talking about this aggressive children. So this is a tremendous lesson which can be applied. In concrete terms, to talk about concrete, it comes down to simply this. You have to be creative, and you have to think, how can I use this my child is particularly creative? Maybe let them play some music. They like to read, suggest good books. They like to draw, all kinds of talents. A child shows a lot of energy and aggression, just like the Gemara says that the Rebbe cites. Channel it to something positive. Let the child go out and take a hobby or lead children or go maybe on a miftzah. There's many ways to channel aggression in positive ways. Obviously, each child requires a particular attention. So there are very many concrete steps in doing this. And it's important to qualify, we're not talking necessarily that we have the power to transform an evil desire or an evil act. That's not the goal here. The goal is, number one, preempting issues, which is before anything happens. You see aggression, don't wait till there's trouble. Initially, use the aggression, use the creativity. If all our schools and our homes did that, we would preempt many, many issues. Kol hagadol mechaveri yitzrei gadol mimenu, the Talmud says. The greater the person, the greater is their energy, the greater is their yetzer hara. So preempting that is by allowing to give them outlets to express that power instead of suppressing or ignoring it. If, God forbid, a person already has a desire in the wrong direction, and may have even, God forbid, thought about it, spoke about it, or even acted on it, that too, first of all, is tshuva. A person can do tshuva. And really, honestly, regret it, but more importantly, rechanneling it is a critical component in true transformation. And that is, everyone is capable of it. Total transformation is the domain of the tzaddik, who has killed his yetzer hara, who doesn't have any sense of self, and therefore no sense of pleasure in anything of this world. And Mashiach comes, it says God will shecht, will slaughter ultimately the yetzer hara. God will remove the ultimate toxins. But there's many things we can do today that are a taste of a time like that, on a small scale, more subtly, not necessarily on the highest particular level. Leads me to question number 2. Question number 2, which follows this one, is a question about education. You mentioned discipline through love, the writer writes, on one-to-one basis, which was very practical. How can this be implemented into a classroom setting? Sometimes it becomes very difficult to portray care and love and discipline when it's not on an individual basis. So essentially taking this particular question and now applying it to the classroom setting. I want to add to this question, this of course means you're dealing with a group. And therefore when you're dealing with a group, one size does not fit all. So now, the answer to this is, I think, goes back to something let's call the difference between fear-based education and love-based education. Without going into the entire history of it, but it's very clear that the default education system, both secular and unfortunately has seeped also into the Jewish system, is very much a fear-based education. You see it how punishment is used. You see it as discipline, and often children get hurt by it. Instead of feeling that it's coming from love, they just become frightened. They shrink in corners. I remember myself as a child, that there is definitely lacking an element of compassion. And this goes to a fundamental principle in Torah, in Chassidus, and the Rebbes particularly. And that is that always Yemin Mekareves Usmel Decha. Discipline is not an end in itself. It's a step toward love. The Frierdiker Rebbe once did something that was just whatever it was. His father went over and touched his cheek. Just a touch. And afterwards, which he never did before, and afterwards, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that he saw his father crying in the corner. And that's what remained with him. It is critical that we convey discipline through love. Yes, you can tell the child you love them, but the easy and lazy approach is when we just do it with fear. And I believe this can also be implemented in the classroom. In the classroom as well. Obviously, we need authority. We need to know that there's discipline, there are rules, and so on. But what's wrong with explaining to children why there are rules? And not in the way that you're compromising them, conveying the deep compassion. I have no doubt a teacher that disciplines, and every child knows that teacher loves him or her, the attitude will be completely different. This doesn't mean children, of course, are wild. And there'll be times when they'll need strict discipline and all kinds of other measures that need to keep people in line. But the same principle we apply to the individual can be applied to a classroom where, of course, it has to be qualified. It's not that easy because we don't have the resources to deal with every individual child. But if there's a particular troublemaker in class, particular troublemaker that usually causes trouble to other students. We all have in our class this troublemaker. The one that either the teacher would ignore, the teacher would throw out, the bad apple, some call it. I don't like that word. So what do? You say, listen, I can't compromise the rest of the class because of one child. If it was just one child, I would find a way to channel, to discipline, mix it together, love, discipline, etc. But here's a whole classroom. So, yes, we need to be extra vigilant. I'm not suggesting that you can allow one student to destroy the entire classroom. What I am suggesting is maybe that student should be talked to after class, maybe with the parents. Find ways to channel that aggression. Which brings me to an interesting story. I was studying with a fellow over Skype once a week. He was in Brussels. And one day he tells me, interesting, he said he went to private schools in Brussels, in Paris, in different European elite private schools, secular schools. And he said there was a particular, it was known in those days in European schools, there was a particular kid who was extremely wild. His name was Paul Holdengraber. His parents came from Austria, and he was known. He was being expelled from one school to the other, but his parents were well-to-do, and they were able to afford to put him into one school and another. The day word came to this private school that this Paul is coming to join the school. Now the kids couldn't wait because they wanted a troublemaker to see how he's going to disrupt the system. And these were very strict schools, private schools, boarding schools, the works. Paul Holdengraber joins the class, and this friend of mine who I was studying with tells me, here's what happened. He was, I think it was 12 years old, kids, 12-year-old. So they're sitting the first day in class, everyone's waiting for this guy to suddenly explode and do some trouble. He's quiet, very disciplined, quiet. Till the end of the class, the last minute before the bell rings, this Paul raises his hand and says to the teachers, the first day of his school, and everyone knows his reputation, his horrible, delinquent reputation. He says to the teacher, you know something? You're a terrible teacher. I've been listening here patiently, and I thought maybe you'd get better, but you're really a horrible teacher. But there's some good news. If you come to my house tonight, without pay, I will teach you how to become a better teacher. And he said this nonchalantly, a 12-year-old boy speaking to his teacher. You know, of course, the whole classroom burst out laughing. The teacher was furious. And Paul was out of school and expelled the next day. That was the type of delinquency. He wasn't just a troublemaker. So, the fellow that knew me said, I had to find out. This is 35 years ago, he says. And I haven't seen him since. I want to know where he is today. He's either became a major criminal, or he must be doing something really powerful. So he went on a Google search, and he found Paul Holdengraber. What is he? He's the head of a certain strategic initiatives at New York Library, of no other place than New York City. And so I went to look it up myself. I think he's no longer there, but when I looked it up, fascinating. His bio says he's a man that thinks out of the box, that challenges the status quo, and always comes up with new ways to develop initiatives, things that others don't come up with. You literally can trace the root to his personality. I don't know how that happened. Honestly, I didn't do research. But such a kid could be sitting in any classroom right now. And probably will be destroyed, either through discipline, through suppression, may get angry, be misunderstood. I'm not saying, God forbid, we tolerate such a student. You know, there's 3 rules. There's respect, there's gratitude, and so on. But someone there, I am sure, understood and probably took that child out of school and found a way to channel some of that aggression. And this is definitely possible. And using the Rebbe's principles that I've been reading here, using the concept of taking a spark that may have been shrouded, maybe shrouded and misdirected, and directing it properly, you can preempt many things and even transform things once there's been a little trouble. So that's the general answer. Of course, much more to be said. Question number 2. Now let's move on to the next question. Since we're talking about iskafya and ishapcha, someone writes that last week you read a series of questions. At the beginning of last week's session, you read a letter from someone asking regarding the relevance of Tanya. That the prakim, the early chapters of Tanya, seem to just make us all feel like failures, filled with guilt, inability to live up to the standards that the Alter Rebbe lays out. But you didn't end up clarifying and answering this point. You just simply said that this is a good question. So I have to say about this question, this also is a good question. And here I will attempt to respond. But I'll respond in a broad way because Tanya is, as we all know, a rich book, to say the least. I wouldn't even say it's a book. It's a Likutei Eitzos. It's a collection of advice written by none other than a Nun Sol and a Neshama Chadash of the Alter Rebbe, addressing all questions to all answers. Or I should say all answers to all questions. To the extent that the Alter Rebbe had confidence that even if you cannot find an answer, as we addressed earlier in earlier weeks, go to the G'daylim Shabir, find the mature, find the leaders, find people that could speak to you to apply these ideas in Tanya. That's how confident the Alter Rebbe is what he had written. That he recognizes Jedig Bakir Kamina, that he recognizes everyone, and people recognize him with all the interpretations. And therefore the Tanya has the answers. So what I will be doing is in the continuing episodes, try to apply certain principles of Tanya, show their absolute relevance. And we'll begin now. The question here is the one that we've been discussing somewhat, the difference between refraining, abstaining from something, which is called in the lexicon of Chassidic thought, iskafya, koife, to hold back, to suppress, versus ishapcha, transformation, sometimes called channeling. As I mentioned, in Tanya you can argue that he primarily focuses on, for the regular person, the Beinani, the average person, refraining. Talks about to be masiyach das, to not concentrate on something that's negative, moyach shalta alev, self-control, controlling impulses. He also talks about more than that, which we'll soon address. But it seems to be the main focus, which of course begs the question, as this writer says, how do I make sense out of my impulsive thoughts? According to what I've read in psychology books, he's talking about secular. Should we suppress our thoughts? They're bound to return with even greater force. Because we've been discussing, if a person is continuously thinking about something, they suppress it once, twice. How long can you hold back the dam? It's rushing. And you constantly live in a material world that is always evoking all kinds of temptations trying to seduce us. So what then must one do? So in the secular world, he says, all you need to do is welcome the impulsive thoughts, try to sort through them, and find meaning in them. Chassidus helps us find meaning in them altogether differently. That recognizing that the challenge itself is something you need to embrace, to know that this is exactly what God gives God pleasure, this is what God wants. For me to be closer to Him, to give these challenges, and that should give us the impetus, the motivation to push away these impulses. But how can one ultimately continue to hold up the fort, a battle of this type of nature that is a constant assault on us? So this is definitely addresses the big issue of Tanya. So I just want to lay out something briefly, and I'm going to say it in simple English, but if you were able to translate Tanya and strip it from the Hebrew words, even if you know Hebrew well, especially because we were conditioned a certain way with these words, which in many cases, like the writer wrote last week and many of you have expressed, doesn't speak to me, as a matter of fact, is a turn-off, or turns me into feeling guilty, feeling something inaccessible. Let's speak a little simple English. And by no means am I saying this is a definitive translation of Tanya, but I would definitely say it's a possible application. The Tanya, the Alter Rebbe wrote, as we know, he thought through the whole Tanya. It wasn't written in bits and pieces. It was written as a picture, a map. You can say a map, a program of becoming a healthier person, which goes hand in hand, consider this with being a godlier person. So we begin, you can say, as children that are pure, but then we enter into a corrupt world, driven by self-interest, driven by all kinds of subjective temptations, instant gratification, all kinds of distractions. So the Alter Rebbe had to address this reality. And he was addressing a reality that is an existent one. We're not getting into what level each individual is. It's a reality. It's a reality in existence. So when you look at Tanya in that way, and I'm not going to give the whole map right now, but the thing that Tanya begins with is laying out this map. He describes the world for what it is. A world where there is holiness, but the holiness is primarily concealed in a darkness. Rishayim Gevrim Bey, a world that is Mole Klippus V'Sitrach, which does not mean an evil world. It means a world surrounded by husks. That's what Klippus are. Klippus are shells. Where you don't see the fruit, you only see the shell. Which means an outer surface existence. And that's what we are consumed with. That is our reality. Our consciousness is consumed by the material surface of existence. The first step to any growth, this has really nothing to do, I'm not even using religious terms now, is to get beyond the surface. as long as you live on the surface, you will be a victim of the surface. You will be defined by it. Any person that wants to grow knows you have to go beyond the superficial. So how do we get beyond this so-called husk, this concealment, as he describes it in the first, let's say, 8, 9 chapters? So the answer is, you have to recognize that there's kedusha in there somewhere. There's holiness in this world. This is what's called, there is a divine soul, and there's an animal soul. This is universal to every person. So if you read Tanya literally, or someone who taught it to you, just taught it to you technically, and you didn't feel that I'm talking about my life, your life, personal, yeah, you read chapters 7, 8, 6, 7, 8, those chapters, you come away, wow, such darkness. Everything is consumed by the klippa, things that are permitted, things that are not permitted, things are bound, also b'dei same. Terrible scenario. But if you think of it as a description of what the world looks like, the world on the surface level, that's what it looks like. It's controlled by self-interest. That doesn't mean necessarily evil. It depends how that's channeled. Most of the world is what he calls klippas nega, a neutral state. But it's a neutral state concealed. As the Barditchever said, that halavai, God would say, let me give them Elam Haba in life. Let them tangibly experience it and write in the books about what Elam Haza, Mole, Klippas, and Hashem Gevrim Bey looks like. Instead, you gave us Elam Haza, and that's what we tangibly experience, and you write in the books about the spirituality. But the Alter Rebbe has to begin somewhere. The battle begins by what we call Yediyas HaMachla Chetzer Refuah. We need to know the problem. Someone says, hey, life is great in this earth. They're not going very far. The problem is that yes, and even if there's no particular act of evil, the mere fact that godliness, that the neshama, the soul, the inner forces that make the world tick, that make us tick, are hidden, is already a problem. Because that's the root of all problems. Remember, problems don't begin with a problem, it begins with a concealment. It begins with a state of a void, a vacuum. So that's what Alter Rebbe lays out. And then he talks about different individuals, how they deal with this. A tzaddik is on one level. A Rasha is on the other extreme level, who's most people in the category of Rasha v'tevle, as the Alter Rebbe says. And then there's the Beinoni, who's the one that begins to try to make some order in a world like this. A tzaddik is of a different ilk. We'll soon discuss that too. That's also relevant to us. Why do we need to know so much about a tzaddik when none of us can become a tzaddik? Everyone always asks this question. Even a Beinoni, you could argue, is almost impossible, because based on the Alter Rebbe's interpretation, a Beinoni is not just an intermediary with half sins, half mitzvahs. A Beinoni is someone that has what? That has control over their levushim, over their expressive tools, expressive garments called thought, speech, and action, though their faculties may be brewing and brimming with all kinds of different potential, even for the negative, even the animal, but they suppress it all. According to that, how is anyone going to become a Beinoni? There's obvious questions. But let's not even, before we get to that specific question, the point of the matter is, the Alter Rebbe is describing reality. And he says, you want to grow, the first thing is you need to know what that reality is. And now let's start the journey. The journey is, you ready to start? There's no magic tricks. The journey begins with taking control over your life. You don't want to do that, there's no one to talk to. One thing the Alter Rebbe cannot do, or no Rebbe can do, take away free will. A person has to want to. If a person is absolutely content and satisfied with their situation, even if it's the worst possible situation, they find themselves happy, delusional happy, what can you say? It's another discussion, deserves its own topic, which I'm sure we'll address in the future. But here we're talking about Tanya's based on one principle. You're interested in making a move. And this is where it begins. Tanya is not speaking about one person, it's speaking to millions of people. Every person makes a move in a different way. So yes, the statement is Beinoni is very relative. The definition the Alter Rebbe gives of Tanya Beinoni is not one type of person. He's giving you an archetype, a personality type, a person who's ready to engage. He's ready to break the surface. I don't want to live on the husk level, on the klippa level. I want to experience something real. I want to know what my purpose in life is. I don't want to be subject to the whims of my animal soul. Whatever I see, whatever I hear, drags me this direction, seduces me in that direction. That's a Beinoni. She's saying, Tanya says, he never did and never will do an Avera. The Rebbe explains that's a state of being. It's a person who's made a commitment that in this state of being, clearly later in Tanya he says, any person can become a Beinoni. How is that consistent? If you never did an Aver, then it's not every second, every hour. In those chapters 12, 13. The answer is because in that state, qualitatively, you have made up your mind that this is what you want to do. You want to engage, and you want to not live by the status quo. You don't want to be a victim of circumstances. That's a Beinoni. A tzaddik is a different ilk altogether. A Rosh Hashanah is just staying where he is. From time to time, he does something maybe. A Beinoni has become a player in the game. Not just a bystander, a player. And every one of us is a Beinoni in a different way. Because every one of us has different challenges. This is the message of Tanya. He's speaking to you. How do you apply self-control? That's where it begins. Because you want to be a player in the game, my friend. There's a discipline required. How do you want to play music? You want to be an athlete? You need to train. You need to prepare yourself. You don't just come in. Every system needs some discipline, needs some requirements. The concept of discipline shouldn't frighten us. There's no system in the world that doesn't have a discipline. Medical students have a discipline. Legal law students have a discipline. Writers do. Musicians do. Everybody has a discipline. It may not be something we like. We'd like to just do whatever we want. But you want to grow, you need a discipline. So the concept of Meir Shalat Alev, and especially the Chiddush and Tanya, that it's natural to us, it is. If someone were to tell you that through effort, you will find $1 billion, you'll suddenly find the discipline to get there. Because the reward is worth it. If someone says to you, just discipline yourself without any reward, of course you say, what do I need it for? So these are simple ways to apply Tanya in a personal way. And if you look in Tanya, you see it's not even forced. Now I want to add something else. A sikh that I refer to you, and I suggest everyone read the sikh. In Shabbos Parsha Vayetze, Tov Shin Nun. Tov Shin Nun. That would be 1989. It probably wasn't yet the new year. But something like November 1989. Parsha Vayetze Tov Shin Nun, printed in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shin Nun, Volume 1. The Rebbe says, he speaks about Yaakov Avinu, he speaks about the 3 stages in his life. The time he was in Israel, the time he was in Haran, by Lavan where he built his family, and the 17 last years where he was in Mitzrayim. That was his main life. And the Rebbe says these are the 3 levels of Tzaddik Beinoni and Rasha. Within the scholars, within Yaakov Mitoshe Shlema, he had the completion of all types of Avodah, obviously relative, subtly, Bedakus to a Yaakov. And then the Rebbe makes a statement. He speaks about, he quotes Tanya, and he says that Tzaddik Beinoni and Rasha is within each one of us. There's different states of being where sometimes you're in a state of a tzaddik, things that are completely impossible for you to do, that are negative. There are things that you're in a state of a Beinoni, and there's the things that you're in a state of a Rosh Hashanah with the objective of doing tshuva. Read the Sikha. The Rebbe is taking Tanya, that we always learn, tzaddikim are off limits. Beinoni is barely, halavai Beinoni. And Rosh Hashanah more or less is what most of the people, that's it. You resign yourself. The Rebbe says all 3 levels are within us. You see from there that it's archetypes. We're not talking about linear. The problem is, frankly, and to put it bluntly, we were taught Tanya like you teach kindergarten children. Children think in terms, tzaddik, Beinoni, Rasha. There's a tzaddik, there's a Beinoni, there's a Rasha. They don't think in terms of an archetype. In case you need an interpretation of archetype are almost conceptual identities. It's not individual. Yes, the Alter Rebbe uses Rabbi as an example of a Beinoni. But that's an example. An archetype, when we talk about the world of Atzilus and Chassidus, the world of Bria, these are archetypes. Chesed of Atzilus. It's not a particular place somewhere in the heavens you'll find Chesed of Atzilus. It's an archetype. Even Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, though they lived begashmis in this world, the whole point of Chassidus is, when the Sefer HaBorach Chassidus brings Avram, said, when Avram came to earth, Chesed of Atzilus said to Hashem, what do you need me for? You have a Chesed walking around on earth. What does that tell you? There's a chesed inside your neshama, inside of mine. That's why we have Avram within us, Yitzchak within us, Yaakov within us. These were people who were tzaddikim gemurim. Avos hamarkov, heinen hamarkov. We have a Moshe within us. Now obviously you'll say, well, they're not dominant forces. What dominates is nefesh habahamis. Yeah, but they're forces. And the question is, can you activate them? Obviously, that's why the Alter begins in Tanya. The first thing is we have to deal with our dark reality. That's why iskafya is rule number 1. You can't begin with anything if you're not ready to suppress. You just want to enjoy everything, you just want to transform. You can't transform without suppressing. Suppressing simply means, frankly, is discipline. Withholding. You want to do something? You don't do it because right now there's something more important to do. You're going to daven. You're going to do a mitzvah. There's something more important to do. You're tempted to do something else. You wait. That's called iskafya. Is it a lifetime doomed to iskafya that I just wait and just suppress? Absolutely not. Because you have inside of you, as the Alter Rebbe develops further, after Moshe Alter Rebbe starts developing, and he speaks about the two ways, Yosh is an Ave Misuteres. Fundamentally, at our core level, we are divine. Then we have the Derech HaRuch K'tzara of his bonus, contemplation. So this leads me to something concrete. I want to make a suggestion, which brings me to the question of iskafya and ishapcha, the question that people also asked about the issue of self and individuality. Kabbalah cell that we talked about. So, at the end of the day, people keep asking the question: if I'm bottle, I nullify myself, then I'm not there. If it's me, then I am there. How do we reconcile the two? So I explained it, I would say theologically or philosophically, that the real you is a divine you, and you have to so-called nullify not the real you, the you that you think you are. So-called the ego, the self-oriented you. But people will say, 1 second, but that's also part of my individuality. So Chassidus, now I'm going to talk about a theme of Chassidus that you'll see everywhere in the Maimorim, especially when they talk about how to daven. So you'll find that there are 3 stages in any contemplation. This is a language, I'll just tell you the language of Chassidus. It's Mamala Kalam, Seviv Kalam, and Kula Kalei Kamachar Atzmos. Right? So Mamala Kalam is considered to be the divine that relates to existence. We'll call it immanent energy. Seviv Kalam is the divine that transcends existence. And Atzmos is the one that transcends transcendence, and thus has the power to unite Mamala and Seviv. So Chassidus talks about this many places. You want one reference? You can look in Ayin Beis in the chapters where he talks about Limud Torah. She says the first we begin with Limud Torah Adaita Denafsh. You learn Torah because it means something for you. Or the contemplation and davening is you say Moida Ani Lifanecha Shavzata Binishmasi. Melechai V'Kayim Shavzata Binishmasi. You talk about yourself. Ani Nishmasi. Because the morning you wake up, the first thing you say, I'm awake. Thank you, God. Well, you don't mention God's name, for giving me back my life. For giving me a new day. So chayecha, you see how God is your sustenance. So the first contemplation, and this is a concrete step, is instead of focusing, I woke up, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I have to go to work, I have to get on the phone, I have to get on the text, check my text messages. The first thing is, why don't you just focus, not on a divine that's beyond you, a divine that's within you, and say, you know something? It's a great blessing. I have a new day. A renewed contract. God said, I'm giving you life another day. I'm renewing my contract with you. I'm telling you that you are indispensable. I want you here because you have a mission. Just acknowledging that. What does that do? That takes your individuality, and instead of directing it toward selfish purposes, whether even like food or drink, not necessarily even negative ones, you're focusing on your inner life. That you have a soul within you. And they say to Neshama to be me, individual, to Herehi. To the whole. Then you talk about the blessings. Pekeach Ivrim, open the eyes. Intelligence. Gives me garments. You're simply thanking for what? Not for something beyond you, for your individuality. For that you were created uniquely you, with all your particular skills and your needs. All about your needs. That's what we talk about. That's contemplation 1. So it's a very healthy contemplation, just directing individuality, that you're an individual that was placed here by God. I don't think anyone has a problem with that. That's not nullifying you. It's all about you. Except not about you, your agenda, it's about you living up to the purpose of which you were created. Then comes these abundance we'll call Seviv Kalam. And now you're talking about the hafla. You come to say, there's divine force. Is it only about me? Is God, the whole purpose of God, the divine energy was simply to give me life? To give me health? You come to realize, God is beyond me, beyond my scope, beyond existence. He's transcendent. You have a sense of awe and wonder. The example I mentioned is one about Ave Yira in human terms. Remember, the muscle for God and the human being is like a husband and wife. Yes, you thank your wife for what she's done for you, or she thanks the husband for what you've done for me. But then there's a sense of respect, of mystique, something the spouse has that you don't really fully understand. They're beyond you, not just what they do for you. And that's level 2. I use wonders that God is beyond. That does not nullify your individuality. On the contrary, your individuality, your relationship with the divine as it's on your terms, has now dictated there are higher terms. And this is a blessing for you because it's like climbing a mountain and now you see a broader horizon. You see a broader horizon and you keep climbing. So it's like someone will say, you know what, I like my little cave down below. That's where I'm safe and comfortable. That's where I feel me. You know something? We're here not just to satisfy the me, that's step 1. The next step is, we want you to climb. You have potential. How is your potential going to be actualized if you remain stuck in your perspective? Even the divine that speaks to your perspective. Ein chavish materis atzmi. The way some scientists put it, you cannot change the system from within the system. So Seviv Kalam is actually a redemption of getting and saying what every thinker, every philosopher, every poet, every romantic always wanted to know. How high can I reach? Is there a limit? Is the sky the limit? The answer is no. You can contemplate and think about Haflos Ein Sof. So Haflos Ein Sof sounds so foreign when you hear it in Hebrew. In simple English, it means that there's a reality far beyond you. And that's something you too can experience. So now you're experiencing awe. Instead of being filled, your heart being filled with the divine, Moida'ani, my needs, my life, I'm breathing oxygen, I'm also sensing that I'm part of something far bigger. I'm part of a bigger picture, a mystique. But then comes the question, where do we go from here? Which one is it? So Chassidus says there's a third dimension. And here you come to contemplation that God is not bound even by transcendence. He can join the two. That yourself, your individuality with which you began, that itself becomes integrated and integrates the sense of mystique. And this is an endless journey. Just think of it like information, knowledge. Today you understand something and you know something else is a little above your head. Tomorrow what was above your head now becomes within you. That's integration. And then what's above your head is something higher. The Alter Rebbe discusses this in the mind of Veschana V'Yadaita, in the Likutei Torah, the relativity of Sefer V'Mamal. It's like B'chol Ma'itcha. You say, V'haftas Hashem Elkecha B'chol Nafshecha. B'chol Levavcha B'chol Nafshecha. Levavcha, filling your heart. Including, by the way, the animal soul. Levavcha, B'shnei Yitzarecha. The two, not Litcha, Levavcha. So even the animal also is included in it. Relative, each person to their level, as we discussed. Then comes B'chol Levavcha B'chol Nafshecha. Then B'chol Moedecha. Moedecha, many meanings, but literally B'chol Moedecha, with all your might, with all your beyond. Your Mo'ed Shalcha. Beyond, take a step a little further. In chapter 15 in Tanya, that 101st move, that one move outside of your conditioning, outside of your regilis, outside of your routine. That one move is a shift. So here too, that you go outside of yourself. That's Moedech. And everybody's Moedcha is a little different. Chassidus speaks about that relative to you, if it's more than what you had to do, even though for another person that may have been not more than he had to do, that would be regular, but for you it's that way. Like the story of Rav Zusha, that he's afraid whether he lived up to being Rav Zusha, then you touch Ma'id Atzmi, Ma'id Amiti, the true Ma'id above. And the third level is coming to, of course, it's something far harder to reach. Ultimately it will be only when Mashiach comes, but we can have a taste of it, Chassidus says, where the two things join, where it's awe that becomes integrated. Now, I would suggest contemplation, everybody can contemplate on these levels according to you. You have to just find time, patience. You can do it in davening. In Chassidus it speaks about, in the different kuntresim, about Kuntras Atfilah and Aveda and other places, it talks about the 4 rungs of davening. Here I was talking about 3. There's the morning, Birchas HaShachar, then there's Birchas Krishma, Shema, and Shemoneh Esrei. These are the levels that we climb. 4 rungs of the ladder of Yaakov's dream. So yes, maybe it's time to start a prayer club. You know, prayer is a lost art. It's one of the questions that will be coming in future episodes about what davening is. Halavai would really be able to know myself, but listen, we're all in this together. But we look into Chassidus, if you take it seriously, these are methods. These are methods for us to grow. So this is a little taste of how you can apply some ideas in Tanya. And regarding the idea of self-expression versus nullification, whether it's in marriage or self, we discussed an unhealthy annihilation of the individual. That's obviously not what we're looking at. But the bottom line is that it's a combination. There has to be a self, yes. The self has to be directed not to your interests, has to be directed to higher interests. And then that self leads you to a place beyond the self. That is a concrete, practical thing that every one of us can do if you just take the time. There are times where we appreciate something, internalize it, and there are times where we experience the awe of something beyond us. Now, let me go to another question. As usual, we probably will not cover them all. And I keep pushing off the topic of depression and anxiety. It deserves its own. So the next week I definitely will begin in Mr. Hashem with that. But I want to talk about mechanical versus dynamic Judaism. One of the great challenges in life is, and this is across the board, most people in this world are conformists. That's how it is. We're by nature Medini, as the Rambam says, we're social creatures. And we conform. We grow up in homes, in environments, in schools, and we follow the guidelines unless some trauma or something happens that shakes us out of it. In Judaism, this has an advantage, this has a disadvantage. The Rebbe once said in the refraining, says there's the Gemara in Yerushalmi that says that when he walked into the base Knesset, he heard them davening, and they were saying Moedim. So without even thinking, menafshe kara, he automatically bowed down. Most of us would see that as a virtue. Imagine, a person is so permeated, he doesn't even need to think about it. He hears Moedim automatically, reflexively, he just bows down. But we know there's the concept of mitzvahs anoshim ulamada, which means to do mitzvahs mechanically, robotically. In that case, you can interpret that story not as a positive. Yes, it's nice that he's bowing down and not doing something else, but is that called avodah? I mentioned chapter 15 in Tanya. It's a whole foundation. Avodah means out of your routine. Let's not talk about it from a healthy perspective. Things that are done mechanically always tend to stagnate and become stale, and ultimately you'll pay a price for it. It's good to go into automatic pilot from time to time, in a marriage, in relationships, in other areas, but it cannot survive an automatic pilot. So one of the questions that I have here is a woman writes to me about a child that she has. He's 17 years old and refuses to come to the Shabbos table. He's 17. He stays locked in his room. She says, I don't really know what he's doing, but he's definitely not part of our Shabbos table. And she thinks he's even doing things that are, God forbid, not complete Shabbos kosher. She didn't know the details. Does he have a girlfriend? She thinks he's also experimenting with drugs, etc. She's at wit's end, what do you do? So I listened closely. I said, so what does your Shabbos table look like? She says, our Shabbos table looks like every week, like everyone's Shabbos table. We set the table, we serve the food. So I said, every Friday night looks the same? She says, yeah. So I said, so why would he want to come to the Shabbos table? It's a boring place. The same recipes, the same songs, the same arguments, the same falling asleep at the same time at the table. It's completely like mechanical. 17-year-old is looking for action. You know something? Now he's in his room. Soon he'll have the courage. He's going to leave and not be there altogether. So what do you suggest? She says. I said, I suggest your husband works. Let him invite a few people in his work to come for a Friday night dinner. Have an argument. Invite some atheists. Invite whoever. I was just making a joke. Invite people. Make a dynamic table. It should absolutely not be the same every week. No Shabbos should be the same. And she asked me, I never heard this before. So I said, open up Chumash. Rashi says in a number of places, why does it say in the Torah, Hayayim, V'yedaita Hayayim, Atim Nitzavim Hayayim? A number of places. I think more than, I don't know how many. Rashi says, because what means Hayayim? When Moshe said it was today, or today when we read it today? That you should never allow the Torah to become an old thing, and it's like Kol Yom Yir Beinechem Chadashim, like new or Chadashim, Mamish new. The Rebbe brings it so many times. It's so many times that some people think that itself became a routine. That's how many times the Rebbe says it. Chadashim means kipshute. It doesn't mean changing, God forbid, the laws. It doesn't mean changing anything. It means you play the music every time differently. You don't sing a song the same way. You don't say Shema Yisrael the same way. I wish we were told this in yeshiva. But it's very obvious that's what's expected. And what do you think? Like they say, the line goes, when you think what you thought, and you say what you said, and you do what you did, what's going to be the results? What are you going to have? You're going to have what you had. If nothing changes, nothing changes. It's all cause and effect. Vitality brings vitality. You're going to do the same thing again and again and expect different results. They call that a sign of insanity. So we have to know that mechanical Judaism is considered a problem. Is it better than nothing? Yes. Even doing a mitzvah without kavanah, some mitzvahs, fine. But is it going to create a dynamic experience for children or for us? It's literally like a disease. It may be quiet. It may not seem terrible. So what? You're doing something mechanically. But it starts eating away because the spirit needs life. Everything about this world is mobility, is movement, not static. Dead things are static. What does the Shalosh say and Alter bring in Tanya? What's tefillah b'lei kavanah? A prayer without an intention is a body without a soul. Not to sound morbid, it's called a corpse. It's called something that's dead. So it's critical, especially in our day and age, to infuse Yiddishkeit with passion, and there's ways to do it, simple ways. Make your Shabbos table alive by bringing guests to the table. Do things differently. Talk about a mitzvah. Say Moed Ani in a new way every morning. Why do we say it? Get rid of the mechanics. Obviously there are times, as I said, you have to lean back on the automatic pilot. Automatically you bow. But it has to be, more importantly, deliberately. Think of how am I going to make, yes, a keres habayis, a mother at home. Father as well. Be creative. How are we going to make this next Friday night different for us and our family? It's a new Shabbos in the world. Chassidus talks about that the world is created anew every second. That's a nice concept. You know what it means? That every second you have to experience a new type of energy, a new vitality. The Rebbe says in the Sikhin, he says, why did Amos to make every second new? Because we have every second a refreshed opportunity to do something different. So even if yesterday or a moment before was not so good, you have a new moment now. Being that the time is limited and we're sticking to our 1 hour, and I would love to cover more subjects, but as some of you suggested, to elaborate a bit more, concretize it. So I hope continue the spirit of what we began 3 weeks ago, and we'll continue, and hopefully it helps myself and helps us all to be more inspired, to be more motivated, and above all, to find the Chassidus real tools, real life skills, the gift given to us, that Rabbi poured their hearts and souls into it, Mesiras Nefesh. Our job is simply to access this tool chest and make it a reality in our lives. Thank you very much.